When I made the video showing how I would build the Great Pyramids, or talking about the method I would use, I said to myself that I would make a follow-up video if the original one went over 500,000 views. I want to clear up one thing before I get going on this, though. That video was meant to show the method that I believe, or the method I would use, or at least try to use, to move the stones that make up the bulk of the pyramid structure up. A lot of people made comments saying that I left out stuff, some of which I'm going to get into a little bit further in this video. But that wasn't the point of that video. It was to show specifically how those smaller blocks, that 2.5 million blocks, were moved up to build the pyramid itself. I don't think I got a comment on this specifically in the video, but I want to talk about this a little bit as well, where my theory came from and why nobody has put it forth before. Like, obviously, I don't know the exact reason for that, but I think I can guess. A lot of times when stuff like that is looked at, it's looked at by intellectuals and people that are known authorities or well respected in their field, and their field rarely has anything to do with actually building stuff. So there's a very strong possibility that the method that I describe in the video has already been thought up by someone else, except they weren't somebody that was well respected. And up until recently, with the advent of YouTube and the ability to get a relatively large amount of followers, you couldn't be heard if you were nobody. Now onwards to the comments, and the first one I'm going to talk about is the water method. And a lot of people kind of questioned my dismissal of that method. And my dismissal of that method is my understanding of just how difficult it is to waterproof something so that all of the water you're supposed to be using to move these heavy blocks doesn't just drain out as it's being pumped in. And that's the other issue right there. How do you pump this water? That's a difficult task as well. A lot of people will probably be very surprised that even today on the biggest job sites, how much is done by hand, and not just by hand, but done in not the most efficient way, but generally, usually, in the simplest way possible. Just to do it, if it takes a little bit more time, that's okay, as long as you get it done. And it doesn't involve any additional costs. Along with the waterproofing issue, that would be the single biggest drawback to using that method. There's a lot of extra work involved to get a result that can be done in a simpler way. And that brings me to another method that a lot of people pointed out by a French architect that said there was an internal ramp built. And the problem with an internal ramp, I'm not saying that it can't work. Once again, it involves a lot more work to get a result that can be done using a simpler method. A ramp, by definition, is something that's smooth on the bottom, so you would have to do extra work to make that smooth so that the stones could be rolled up. Also, there's an issue with the rolling of the stones. People have asked me how much work would be involved in tipping the stones up and, how long that would take. Well, okay, the stones had to be cut, first of all. So the stones are being cut while they're being moved up. So it takes a lot longer, I'd assume, to cut out one stone than it would to tip up one level. And also, human beings are not pack animals. Pulling stones up would require endurance that typically we're not known for. We're best suited for the sprint in that we'll put out a huge amount of effort in a very short burst, and then we'll take a break and recharge. And I see that as you tip one stone up and you take a break while you wait for the next one to be pulled over, to be tipped up again, and so on and so forth. So getting back to the ramp again, not only is the bottom flat, and that would require extra work, you would also have to build over top of it to maintain that opening so that you could carry the stuff up. And that would be extra work, of course, as well. And then what you have is one ramp to move all of the material up for the rest of the structure. And I'm not saying that couldn't be done, but I think that it makes a little bit more sense to tackle the build from four sides, like I said in the video. You don't have any ramp to mess with. You don't have any extra work to build one. You're carrying stones to each side of the structure as you're building it, and you're lifting them up as you go. Now I'm going to talk about what I think is probably the most popular comment that I got, and that's to point out that the pyramids have 8 sides and not 4. I'm not positive where this idea came from. I do know that a channel called Bright Insight said that, and I think that that's where it's coming from, but I'm not positive, like I said. I don't know why they think it's relevant to what I'm saying here, but it was pointed out many, many times. And as far as reliability and accuracy of observation, Bright Insight also pointed out that not a lot of the bronze tools that were used have been recovered. You know, you would think that the place would be littered with them. Well, it's the same reason why you don't find bulldozers and excavators and toolboxes with tools in them littered around the Trump Tower. When the tradesmen are done, they take away the tools that they have used and they use them on the next project. And also, bronze was very difficult to make in the first place, so I don't think they'd be just throwing it on the ground. They would recycle the metal, of course, because it's valuable. And that kind of leads into Quarry and the stones, and a lot of people said that the stones came from hundreds of miles away. That's true for some of the stones, like the big granite blocks that were used inside the pyramid came from Aswan, which is, I think, 800 kilometers away. But the vast majority of the stone that was used came from right there, quarries that are very close to the pyramids themselves. As for how they cut the stones, I'm not entirely sure. I just know that they did. And the evidence of it is left behind. They made trenches between what would be the blocks. And it looks like what they did was they trenched around each block, and then they split it off, and then they moved it over to where it could be lifted up. And then related to that, I got comments from people asking how they were moved over the sand. It would be difficult to do that. I'll concede that. But it's my theory, or at least this is how I would do it, is that as soon as you decide that you're going to build a pyramid, you would want to build a road that goes to the pyramid from the quarry. And to this day, that's still done. One of the first things you do after you settle on your project, make a road so that the equipment can get back and forth. Same thing here. I believe that they would have quarried smaller, thinner stones and then laid those in a series all the way up to the pyramid from the quarry to produce a nice smooth road for the other blocks to ride on. And then once the pyramid is mostly built, you would peel that road up again, like the individual blocks, starting at the quarry end, and roll them over and use them up towards the top of the pyramid. Therefore, that road would not be there either, very much like the bronze or copper saws that the workmen were using. Now let's talk about the bronze or copper saws and chisels that they were using. It's very much, I look at it this way. We don't have any evidence of this, but okay, you look at an arrow. An arrow is made from, like the shaft is made from wood. The tip is made, like it used to be made from stone. They would pick out a very sharp, very strong stone, and they would bond it to the tip, and that would pierce the animal that they're shooting it at. Also, it would provide a little bit more mass so that you get a little bit more distance, maybe a little bit more accuracy as well. I see the possibility that they use something harder in the tip of the bronze chisels, and there's no ruling out the possibility that they weren't using diamonds for that. Diamonds are a lot more abundant than people realize, and I'm sure that people back then would have known how hard they are and what they could be used for. So I'm not ruling out the possibility that they took the chisels, the copper chisels, and added diamond to the tip to make it so that it would cut better. And here in modern times, if you want to cut stone, use a diamond saw. And the way that's made is chips of diamonds are impregnated in a powdered metal that's bonded to the plate underneath. And that's not really an advanced technology. It's not known whether they knew about it at the time, but you can't rule out the possibility. And then they could use that on the edge of the saws to cut the stones, either straight saws or even possibly circular ones. Just because no circular saws were discovered doesn't mean that they didn't exist. A lot of people commented on how I didn't include the chambers that go through the pyramid, like the tunnels, and that's just a simple matter of leaving out blocks where you need to. Obviously, something like this had a lot of planning involved. You generally don't try to build a giant structure like this where thousands of people will be involved without doing a little bit of planning beforehand. So if there are going to be tunnels here or chambers there, they would have been planned out from the beginning, and they would have made allowances for them in the beginning as well. And like I said, for the most part, that involved just leaving stones out in certain areas. Related to that are the big granite blocks that were used inside for the king's chamber, I think it's called. And the way you would move those up is you would do something that's called cribbing. You would lift one side a very small amount using a lot of leverage, and then you would slide something fairly thin underneath, and then you would lift the other side again and do the same, and you'd back and forth until you get it up to the height that you need it, and then you would slide it onto that level that you want to put it on. And then to get it up to the next level, you would do exactly the same thing. As the structure was raised another level, they would move those stones up as well. Now, as for how they got from Aswan, which is several hundred kilometers away, down to the building site, every suggestion is that they were floated on barges on the Nile River, and that there was a channel dug and that they floated in on. Now, the waterproofing issue that I talked about before doesn't apply here. If you dig a channel where normally water exists at that level, water will flow into it and it won't leak out. You can use that. So that would be the most practical way to get those stones to the site, is to float them on barges. And then you would have a landing area right there that you would just shove the stones off, and from there you would lift them up. Had a lot of comments from people asking how long it would take, especially talking about, tipping the stones up, as if that would take longer than actually pulling them up. The best estimates that are around these days are 20 years. I tend to believe that's a reasonable figure. It depends upon how many people are involved and how well organized they are. Even the smallest job sites that have a few people involved rely on efficient organization so that you have one crew doing one thing and it's not interfering with what the other crew is doing. And so while several crews are quarrying stones, cutting them out, other crews are moving them over to the road that will bring them up to the pyramid. There are crews that are moving the stones as they are moved over, and then there are more crews that are lifting them up as well. Like I said, they grab a stone, they tip it up, and they wait for the next one. In the meantime, the next crew that's up on that level tips it up to the next level, and so on and so forth. I had a lot of comments on the irregular size of the stones. It's my belief that they were quarried to a certain size, and that through moving them, either from the quarry to the site or up the steps, they might have fractured. Anything's possible. So what you wind up with is a bunch of stones that are a certain size, and then you also have ones that are smaller because they broke off of larger ones. Also, many people pointed out how tightly the stones fit together, and fitting stones tight together is not really that difficult. It just requires work, and quite a bit of it. And like I said, there'd be specialized crews that would do these types of things. And okay, on the first stone, they wouldn't be very good at it, and it would take them longer. But by the time they got to the 1,000th stone or something like that, they would be expert at it. So it would go relatively quickly. And also, from what I understand, the same level of quality is not on the interior of the pyramid at all. It's basically just blocks in there filled in to the best that they could do it without worrying about how closely they fit together. The majority of their effort would be concentrated on the outside of the pyramid to make that as precisely as they possibly could. With regards to using wooden poles to lever the stones up, someone commented that, wouldn't the weight of the stones crush the wood or make it snap? And wood is actually stronger than a lot of people give it credit for, especially people that haven't used it to lever anything up. You can lever up quite a lot of weight with a wooden pole that's 6 or 8 inches thick. And if you get a number of these poles with a number of men behind them, you can lever up much bigger stones than the ones that they had here. From what I understand, the average weight of these stones is around 3 tons. And that's not really a lot of weight when you're trying to lever up just part of it, because that's the whole idea with my method here, is that you're not actually levering up the entire weight. You're taking only about half of that. So it's my belief that these wooden levers lasted a long time. You got a great number of lifts with them. And then when they did wear out and you replace them, wood is much easier to cut and transport than stone. So it would be a fairly trivial thing. Quite a number of people brought up the idea of using ropes and counterweights to help lift the stones, and I'm not going to rule that out. It is possible that they use that. It is possible, of course, that they tried that. However, ropes stretch and they also break, and the last thing you want to have happening is a heavy weight on both ends, because you need the counterweight as well, with a rope in between that's going to break, and the stone falls down that you're trying to lift, and the counterweight falls down as well. Okay, that about wraps it up. I think I covered everything, except there is one comment that I think I got as many times, or maybe even more, than the 8 side of the pyramid, and that's the idea that aliens were somehow involved. Either, people joking around a little bit, or totally serious about it, like it's an actual possibility. I rule out aliens because, for the simple reason that it would take technology that is way, way far beyond anything that we even understand today to travel across the galaxy. And if you're a race of beings that has that technology, I think you probably have more important things to do than fly across the galaxy to play with blocks in a big sandbox.